Okay, chapter 11 is working with images and icons. Literally, we just got done talking about Font Awesome and its icons, and so maybe I was just a little bit ahead of the gun on that. And we've been working with images, but it's worth kind of diving in just a little bit deeper on the different common image types. What are the different image types and what are they good for? And so let's jump in. And so here are some common image types. And so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each one of these. We've all probably used the internet and seen animated GIFs. And so, by the way, GIFs or GIFs, it's a debate for the ages. That's this format. I say GIFs. I think most people say GIFs, but that's not important. The creator of the GIF pronounces it with a soft G. So, anyways, that's why I say it. So, there's JPEGs, which are going to be for your photos, and so supports millions of colors. And so take a nice photo with your camera. The thing that's really great about JPEGs is the compression, and so you could take a nice high quality photo and compress it down into a small file size. And so a big battle that you will have to deal with when it comes to images is obviously the larger the image, the higher the quality. The larger the image size, the better it looks. And so it's really a balance of how small can you make the image size. Why do you want the image size to be small? Well, you have to transmit this internet across the internet, and people have to download it. Maybe at high speeds, maybe at low speeds. You know, not everyone has access to high-speed internet. You know, across the United States or especially across the globe. And so JPEGs are really great at supporting millions of colors and compression. So it has what's called lossy compression, which means every time that you continually resave a JPEG, it's going to compress it down in file size. And this is really apparent when, for example, you take a Facebook image. And so, you know, for example, you take a photo with your camera and then you upload it to Facebook. So Facebook saves a copy of that image and it compresses the image down, and it's still pretty good quality. However, if you just go to your friend's profile picture and you resave that onto your computer, right, you might notice that the saved version on your computer is a little bit more pixelated than the image on Facebook.com. Okay, and that's the idea, is that when you save that same image again, it compresses that image down in size and basically compresses the file size down when it saves it onto your computer. And so you might notice the more you save and resave a JPEG, it's going to become more and more and more pixelated. And so that's kind of a problem with JPEGs, in that they lose some of their quality the more you save and resave a JPEG. Another thing about JPEGs, does not support transparencies. And so a lot of times if you're working in Photoshop, or another photo editing tool, and you want to have a transparent background, you want to save it maybe as a PNG. Because a PNG does support transparency and millions of colors. I believe it's lossless compression. By the way, GIFs don't support. I believe. Let me double check my brain here. Yeah. Let's see. I said 255. GIFs support only 256 colors. And so a lot of times animated GIFs, another way that GIFs are used, simple logos, you know, with not a lot of colors in them. Just like, you know, pretty simple images. They only support 256 colors. I also said pings are lossless. Yeah, it is lossless. Why not then just use ping all the time? Is it generally larger file size? And so last I checked, you know, Facebook, which deals with a lot of images, still saves things in JPEGs. And so if I right-click an image on Facebook, which I'm doing right now, yeah, and try to pull that down, you could see it's saving it as a JPEG. So Facebook still uses JPEG, and again, it's because of that compression versus file size ratio, right? Ping, generally speaking, you know, has lossless compression, meaning you could save it over and over and over again, and it's not really going to lose that quality. It does support the millions of colors like a JPEG does, and it supports transparencies unlike a JPEG. However, it comes with the downside of, generally speaking, a larger file size when comparing it to a JPEG. That's why Facebook still uses JPEGs over pings. But these are and have been historically the three most common image types on the web. A newer type is called WebP, and this was a image format developed by Google. And so you could see WebP when I pull up, it's developers.google.com. When I was doing a code demo in the first hour of this class, I pulled down an image from my YouTube profile, and it saved it in a WebP format. And so if I just kind of pull that up, I believe that was in my chapter 9. I put it in 10, thank you. And so here you could see the file name is EG, and the file extension is WebP. And so now keep in mind I have the file extensions on, so clicking this checkbox in Windows under View will show you both the file name and the file extension. So I always like doing that. And it's also kind of interesting that it opens up in Edge by default. This image does. So I don't know. To me, this WebP, it's a newer format. It's the downfall for a while was that it didn't have wide browser support, and so not all browsers at one point supported WebP, but it's pretty well supported now. You know, just kind of WebP is a modern image format that provides superior lossless and lossy compression for images on the web. WebP lossless images are smaller than PNGs. So of course this is Google, they're going to tell you how much superior their image format is. And the lossy images comparable to the JPEGs are also smaller. So here WebP is saying, hey, if you want lossless compression, we're better than PNGs. If you want lossy compressions, we're better than JPEGs. Lossless WebP supports transparencies. So I guess that's the first thing to realize. You could have both lossless and lossy compression, whereas our previous formats don't have that option. So, and you might wonder, well, what version of WebP? How do I make that selection? How do I decide whether I'm using lossless WebP or lossy WebP? And the answer is going to be when you're in your photo editor of choice. You're going to save as, file save as, and you're going to have to choose that option when you're saving as WebP. So that's WebP. Now SVG, scalable vector graphics. You might be familiar with scalable vector graphics if you're designing any sort of media that needs to scale up in size. And so, you could take one of these JPEG photos, for example, this photo of myself. If you want to put this small image on a billboard, it's not going to scale up very well. And so SVG is this whole concept of, hey, if you want to make something scalable, scale up in size, you can use this SVG format, and it would look good on a web page, or it could look good on a billboard, and then it wouldn't become pixelated. And so SVG actually has its own tag in HTML, and you can see there's this SVG tag which gives you some dimensions. And so when you see this SVG tag, that's kind of what I keep in the back of my mind, is that this would show up very much like an image on a web page, but this image could also scale up and again not become pixelated on a billboard. And so here's like a SVG logo, pretty simple logo with a gradient. And again, a lot of times kind of looking at this, they're going to be, working with coordinates, X and Y coordinates, or the X-axis and the Y-axis dot, so on and so forth. And so that's the big thing on SVG graphics. When you look at the HTML for an image tag, pretty standard stuff. We've got the source attribute, which is where the image is located. The alt attribute's really important for screen readers. And it's also what is displayed if the image doesn't show. So obviously if the source is not configured properly, it'll show the alt text. You can also set a height and a width. which the practice here that a lot of people don't realize. Let's just take an image that I have on my desktop. So I've got this Rankin R logo, right? So I'm just going to take this and put it in my chapter 11 new folder images. A lot of people don't realize that the height and the width can be used in different ways, but there's actually a recommendation here for performance. And so you can see the actual height and width of this is 133 by 133. And so if you go to the properties of this JPEG, and then you click on details, you see the height and the width. The recommendation is to put in the actual height and the actual width for this image here. By the way, now where is this source? We're now in images / Rankin Red. Okay, and so you can say, well, you know, I didn't use it like this. I made my own dimensions, and it still works. And yes, it does. But what the web browser, being Chrome, has what's called a rendering engine in it. And I believe we talked about rendering engines. Whoops. But basically, this is the software in the browser that takes the HTML and draws the pretty screen. And so, rendering engine. As the name suggests, is a component is responsible for rendering the specific web page requests by the user on the screen. It interprets the HTML along with CSS, and a final layout is generated, which is displayed on the user interface. So the rendering engine draws the picture that you see on the screen, and different browsers have different rendering engines. So examples of layout engines, so they're actually given names: Blink, Gecko, Edge HTML, and WebKit. You can kind of look at each one of these, and now it's all coming back to me. Blink is the rendering engine developed by Google as part of Chrome. So Blink is the rendering engine for Chrome. So that's what I'm using. All that just to say, the rendering engine, if you manually give it a height and a width, it actually has to draw the image twice. So when the image downloads the first time, it's basically on a web server, and the client says, you know, hey, I see that there's an image tag in the HTML, so I need to download that image. So your laptop, being the client, goes to the server and says, give me this Rankin Red JPEG image, and your client downloads the image, and then the rendering engine will draw it at its original dimensions. Okay, it will then, the rendering engine will go through and process the rest of the page, you know, footers and everything else, and it will draw this with its original dimensions, even if you do this. You say 50-50, okay, and so it'll draw with its original dimensions once, and then it will go back and draw it with its updated dimensions, 50 by 50, a second time. In a nutshell, it has to draw the page twice. Once with the original dimensions and once with its updated dimensions. And so it's not considered best practice because that slows everything down. Now these browsers are so incredibly fast. Does it really make a difference in 2022? That's a whole nother topic for debate. Point is, recommendation, this height and this width should be configured to the actual height and width. Which brings up another topic, which is responsive images, okay, which is coming up. And okay, maybe this works for the desktop view, but if you have a smaller device, you might need another version of this image that is actually smaller. And so using software, you can save a different version of this image And if I edit this with Paint, literally I can come in here and resize and save it, and then do a file save as, and I'll save this in the same place. Homework chapter 11, images, rank in red, small. Now I have two versions of this image, the small one being a smaller file size and smaller dimensions. And then I can load this small version of the image on a cell phone. And I could load the original one on a tablet and a desktop. And so this is kind of the standard practice this is one practice for responsive images. You can make images that actually grow and shrink in size, or just load different images depending on kind of like your breakpoint. Very similar to how you do in CSS.
Are the SVGs scalable, where they're responsive without having to do exactly that?
Yeah, so let's look at, let's see if we can, I'm trying to think of where I've used SVGs in the past. Yeah, they're much more naturally scalable. Like if I pull in this circle from, now you notice I don't have on this SVG, I don't have a source, right? It's literally figuring it out.
I guess it's too small to kind of.
Yeah, that's too small to even see anything. I wonder if I just mess with these numbers. Well, that broke it. That's good. This is the one that, oh, you know why? Because I just pushed it way off the screen. That's why.
Okay.
Oh, here, width and height. SVG width. No, save, refresh. I'll have to tinker with that a little bit. I'll have to tinker with SVGs a little bit more. Not super common in my experience to mess with SVGs, because I haven't done much with, billboards. You can optionally use CSS to size your images, and they kind of show here in the HTML. Notice there's no actual pixels here. It's by default PX, so that's just a little one-off mistake that's pretty common. You don't have to put the units pixels here, but you do in the CSS.
Does any of the images also respond to like the flexbox properties of grow and shrink, or is it you kind of have to create those images for the various sizes, or
yeah, if you
CSS?
A lot of times it will, but you have to. So let's talk about responsive images, because I think that's where you're going with that. Let's take an image and make it responsive, and there's a couple of approaches. So the question is, hey, if you put an image in a flexbox, does it automatically grow and shrink? And you're going to need to do a little bit to it with the CSS to get that to work. So let's take, and I like this Pexels website, and I've used this before. I particularly like this because most images they're free to download, but they can give you different sizes as well, which comes in handy. And so the first way that I learned to create responsive images was basically this article on W3 Schools. And so I don't think this is the current recommendation that I'll kind of pull up on MDN. But you can kind of see here, as the browser window shrinks, so does, and so maybe that's what you would expect to happen in whether it's in a Flexbox or not. The way that this is done is by adding a width of 100%, height of auto. And so literally with just a couple of lines of CSS, you kind of get this responsive feedback, and I think a lot of times this is what you would expect and you're happy with that. So in my code demo, I'll pull down an image from here, and I'll download the large version of it. Building.jpg. Class of responsive. Obviously, you get to name the class. And we got a huge image. In fact, side scrolling and everything. But as you scale it down, this is kind of the default behavior. Then we're going to add some style to it. And just like they did here, the class of responsive, width of 100%, height kind of auto size the height. So let's format that. And that's the easiest way to get a responsive image. You put that inside of a Flexbox. You know, the Flexbox, you start thinking about a Flexbox, and a Flexbox has children, and so you're probably talking about, you know, for example, a main tag, and the main tag could be the Flexbox, and then you've got inside of main, you've got 3 divs, which are the children. And so I think getting a responsive image, you know, that image might be inside of the div tag, and that div tag might be sizing, you know, doing its own sizing thing, and then the image would be responsive within that. So I don't think an image would necessarily be a flex child, if that makes sense. It would be inside of that, though.
Okay, so it wouldn't kind of also flex around other content within that div?
Yeah, it would flex around the content that it's in. Yeah. Yeah. So that's...
I mean, I guess it'd be a little trickier if you don't need the image to be quite that big and still be responsive. I guess you still have to kind of resize it anyway at some point.
Yeah, which is kind of the other strategy that we can look at now. Now this is the first example. It says, if you want the image to scale both up and down in responsiveness, set the width property to 100% and height to auto. So this scales up and down. If you want the image to scale down, if it has to, but never scale up to be larger than its original size, So interestingly enough, this will allow it to scale bigger and become pixelated, right? But this does not. So a max width of 100% does not let it scale up past its original size. So that could be better if you're dealing with a smaller image and it wanted to stretch past its original width. And kind of a third option here, if you want to restrict a responsive image to a max size, use max width. Oh, and so here max width of 400 pixels. So it's kind of like saying, hey, you can go 100% up to 400 pixels. So the image might be bigger than that. So right now our image is obviously wider than 400 pixels, but this would set a max width of 400 pixels and can scale down from there. Let's set it up a little bit bigger. So here's 800 pixels, and it can scale down from 800 pixels. But obviously the image is bigger than that. So this is a pretty good way of dealing with responsive images. The next article, though, that's a slightly more modern approach is MDN. And it's probably worth, reading through the article, not just jumping through the code examples. So I'll go ahead and leave a link in the Discord. But what you're going to see if you kind of jump ahead into the code demonstrations, there's two attributes that we can add to the image tag. So two new attributes, source set and sizes, to provide several additional source images along with hints to help the browser pick up the right one. So if we kind of look here, image source set. So here's the first image at 480 pixels wide. This is the one then to use at the 800. So source set, basically, we're providing multiple paths and kind of performing a media query here that says, hey, at a maximum width of 600 pixels, load this one. So this is the newer one, the newer approach. And here's your media condition.
So is that inline CSS or is that like in a...
It's all in the HTML. It's all in the HTML. So you can literally see the image going from one image to another depending on the browser width. Let's look at this one, right? Now this one isn't doing that. This image here, it's kind of doing what we were doing before. But this one is swapping images. So I'm going to need to tinker with this one. And again, this is kind of the newer approach for responsive images. Let's go. So I've already got the big image downloaded, so I'm going to try downloading a smaller version of that image. So we go from the small to the regular. Make sure I got my file names right. So I got one building.jpg, that's the large. So I'm going to rename this to building large. And that's building small. So building small, 480. Building large. I don't think I changed these sizes. Now I'm going to just change this one to be the default source, which is building large. And I'll just change my buildings.
You haven't added your relative those pictures.
What's up, Emil?
I said you hadn't added your relative path to those pictures.
Oh, yeah, you're
Oh, yeah. We need to say images slash. Thank you. Well, you did see a jump there from one image to another. Now clearly it doesn't work because these images are still too big for the demo, but you saw that work. Let me hit F12, mobile, and the breakpoint's right there at that 600 pixel. You can see the width, which is where this query comes in. It says at the max width, change it to the 480. So I got the code working.
just the size of the images.
Just the size of the images, yeah. Could make the demo better. But I just wanted to show those two approaches. And I think, the last question is like, well, okay, actually swapping images out might provide some advantages versus just scaling an image up and down, to which that article, should you read, really addresses. Okay. there is a little bit of CSS that can be, used to get the text that would follow an image. You notice here the text is kind of aligned at the bottom, whereas here the vertical alignment's more in the center of the image. And that's where this vertical align, so you could target the image tag, and margin right's going to obviously create that space in between the image and the text. So a little bit of CSS that could be used to align your text a little better. Dealing with floats. If you remember, when I talked about Flexbox, we used to use floats for positioning, and that was for a long time, using floats for positioning, and that kind of created some challenges. But what you could do, the idea of a float is to say, okay, move this thing, float it to the left or float it to the right, which is to say, take this image and put it as far left in the parent as you can, or float it as far to the right inside of the parent as you can. And so it's a way of kind of just pushing things off to the left or pushing things off to the right. It turns out when you use this positioning property called float, the elements around it you might need to clear. So let's do an example of a float. So I'm just going to do my images, rank in red, right? Okay, so paragraph has a block level element, so it's going underneath the inline element, which is the rank in red, and float to the left, and just see what that does. So when you say float to the left, now the paragraph kind of jumps up, which is to say, okay, well this image is going as far left as it can, which is taking it out of what's called normal flow. So normal flow is the normal flow of your HTML. It's the normal positioning. It's the normal flow of the positioning. When you take this image out of normal flow, then everything else kind of wraps around it. In which case, if you don't want this behavior, you don't want other content to wrap around this image like it's doing, you can basically clear the left float, and that kind of puts it back into how it would flow normally. So when you start doing this floating positioning, other elements want to kind of wrap around it, and you might need to say, okay, no, I need to clear this left float. In other words, I don't want it to affect the layout of everything else around it. And so that's floats and that's clearing. So those, but I try and avoid this. In most cases, I don't do positioning with floats.
And then stylistically, sometimes you want to have that image within, and a paragraph kind of wrapping around it. Can floats still be compatible with Flexbox?
Yeah, you can still use floats inside of Flexbox. It's compatible. And so they more or less do the same thing that I just did there. Is they float an image and then they clear the content that's around it. Figure and Fig Caption. So let's just take a look at this example here. So we got this image and we got this this heading that says Scott, Samson, and friend. And so, you know, if you're looking at that in a on a desktop monitor, or you're looking at it on a cell phone, semantically, you know, that heading belongs to that image. And so there was no way, if you just have an image and a heading, like for example, like this, you know, semantically, these two things are not tied together, right? This H1 is independent of that image tag, and they're not linked together in any way. And so the idea of figure and Fig Caption is to link text together with an image. Like that's the idea, is like, okay, these two things are now tied together. Therefore, you know, when you're viewing them on a monitor of a desktop versus a cell phone, like they belong together. They should be next to one another. They're tied together. And so you can kind of see here the figure and a Fig Caption. So if I were to replace what I have with a figure and a Fig Caption, it's really quite simple. You're going to add a figure tag, wrap it around this, and then this H1 becomes a Fig Caption. And the Fig Caption can go, you know, above or below the logo, doesn't really matter. Now this text and this image, now they share the same parent, which is a figure, and now semantically they're tied together. And then you can kind of come in here, if you Fig Caption, font size, you know. And if you want it to look like a heading, then you could still do that, right? Keep in mind, headings should not really be used to just increase the font size. If you want to increase the font size, you want to use CSS. Headings should be used as kind of like the table of contents of a page for Google and screen readers to understand. Okay, this is very much like that content that I just covered with a picture tag instead of the image tag. Now, I think using the MDN article with the image tag would be the approach that I would use. But what I like about this is it's a little bit cleaner in the sense that we've been using minimum width. And it's like, hey, if the minimum width is 460 pixels, load this image. If it then goes up to 678, load this image. If it then goes to 960, use this image, right? So the idea of swapping out images depending on your breakpoints can be done with this picture tag just as well as an image tag. And this is kind of an interesting thing. It says, hey, load the WebP format if the browser supports WebP. Let's use WebP. Otherwise, let's use the PNG. So using this picture tag, you could also say, hey, you know, let's try this. If it works, display that. If it doesn't display it, then let's try this other format. So this picture tag is not really... I'm kind of brushing it off like quickly, but let's do this. the reason you could see that it's currently marked as experimental.
W3 schools says it's supposed to give web developers more flexibility
Yeah.
in specifying image resources.
Yep. So it defines a container of sources for an image. And so so maybe a direction that the industry is trying to get to is using this picture element instead of the image. But the reason why I don't focus on it is it still doesn't seem quite there yet. Let's look at one more thing here. Can I use? So you could see here there's a lot of red on older browsers here, like IE 11 still doesn't support the picture tag. Edge version 12 doesn't support the picture tag. Opera Mini, all versions, doesn't support it. So that's reason enough to just be aware. It's not quietly there.
There's a picture in picture.
What's that?
It was under there. Is there a picture in picture? What's
Picture in picture. Yeah, I don't know.
Is that HTML or is that something else?
Picture in picture. April 2022. So this looks something pretty new. It looks like we got some JavaScript in here.
Oh, okay.
So just be aware using this picture tag is might not be supported by all the most modern browsers. All right. Image rollovers are pretty easily done with a little bit of CSS. So here's rank in red. I'm just going to swap one image. So let's say I hover over the image, and so you see hover effects a lot on the web. It can be done simply using HTML and CSS. It can also be done using JavaScript. So a lot of times, if you can do it purely with HTML and CSS, that's what you want to do. So let's take a look at what we have to do a image rollover. Now the first thing you're going to see is an ID of image 1 on a paragraph tag. So we're not even using an image tag. Instead, we're using a background image for our image. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's take a paragraph with an ID of image 1, background image URL, images / rank in red. Now it's worth saying that if there's no content in there, it's not going to show up. So maybe we're going to need a height. If I remember, 133 pixels was the height. And now we've got a repeating, right? So how do we get rid of the repeating? We're going to say background repeat, no repeat. Okay, so now we've got this image that's in a paragraph. And when we hover it, we want to swap out that image. So it would be pound image1 colon hover. And so this very much like your a:/link, a:/hover. We can put a hover effect on paragraphs or on anything really. And so all we're going to do is background image URL, images slash, really what I would probably do is like just a different background color, like Rankin with a black background. But since it doesn't really need to look good, I'm just going to put the other image on it. And so you could see when you hover it, it's a pretty simple way to do an image rollover. So get a little interactivity on your page. Okay, so the last topic I wanted to kind of cover is this idea of an image map. The idea of an image map is you have an image and it has clickable regions, and then, so it's an image link, and depending on the area that you click, it navigates you to different websites. And so, the idea here on this little example is you could click on this book and it takes you to buy that book. If you click on this book, it could take you to buy that book. And so the way this is done is by creating this map tag, and the map, inside of the map, it has clickable areas. And this area, there, I was looking for the href. There's the href. The area, when you were to click this area, is defined by its coordinates. It would navigate you to this particular URL, and this could be on the internet or a local resource. In this case, it's a local resource. And so I thought I could just take a quick example. And I always think of like sporting matches, and so the image that I'm going to save is Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, which are two boxers. And so if I kind of open up this image, and so all I'm going to do in this simple example is, hey, you click on Floyd Mayweather, maybe takes you to his site. You click on Manny Pacquiao, it takes you to his site. And so you basically have to define coordinates, X and Y coordinates for this image. And, you need a photo editing tool like Photoshop to do this. And Photoshop image map. And they'll give you the coordinates. It can be a manual process. I'm trying to see if I could find a quick how-to. Let me open this with Photoshop. I don't do this every day. So I don't have the, so there's my size, height and width. I want to make this clickable area go to one website and the other one go to another. So I need a window to show me where the X and Y coordinates are. View. Let's do this. I think I can just wing it and figure this out. So let's load up the image tag and images boxing. And there's an attribute called useMap equal to boxing map. So then we have our map called boxing map that has an area tag. Shape is rectangle. And the href is going to be just like a Floyd Mayweather Wikipedia. Oh, there it is. Okay, so for the coordinates, these are basically X and Y coordinates. So 0, 0 is going to be the first. And I guess these are in the upper left, and I'm going to guess this is the bottom right. So let's guess 0, 0, and then we'll I should be able to say half of the width, and then the full height will be the second one. So 0, 0 for the first coordinate, and then half of the width is about 1024, and then the full height 1403. And that would be my guess, and my guess is not working, so let me double check my work. Area 0, 0. I'm just going to change it to be 1010. See if that does anything. Okay. So now I have two things to figure out outside of lecture. This is number one, and number two would be that little bit of JavaScript I said I'm going to write from earlier today.
With the coordinates, don't they start from center usually? So
I believe
they're-
this.
they're
I
like dead center.
believe they start upper left.
Okay.
I believe they start upper. I believe it goes. X, Y, X, Y for those 2 points. So I have two things to figure out in the meantime. All right. The icon libraries. I did a short video on Font Awesome, so that's like a 10-minute walkthrough that I did prior to this lecture, so I can skip over Font Awesome. I've covered creating fave icons in the past.
No, you're right. I mean, even in Microsoft Paint, they do it top left. Zero,
Yeah.
zero.
Yeah. I know I'm close with that, but I'll figure it out probably as soon as I stop this recording. So, chapter 11 lecture complete. I'll go ahead and stop the recording here. Like I said, I'll figure out this this image map and where I've gone wrong here, and then we got some homework. Let me go ahead and open up some homework.